The race is on, and Audi became the first team to hold a 2026 F1 launch of sorts with an event in Munich, giving us the first taste of how much will change for Sauber next year. But although it certainly has the heritage, what should we expect from the future of the latest manufacturer to take on Grand Prix racing? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tell us all about the event is Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, so Audi have taken everybody by surprise and become the first team to launch a 2026 car, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To answer it slightly more accurately, no. What they've done, obviously, this was the use of a show car. What I've liked, and I actually didn't really appreciate this until probably late yesterday evening when the event was wrapping up, was it was actually quite nice to see one of these 26 show cars in person, because I don't know about you, but I became so immune to the 22 show car. Because the 22 car got rolled out. Remember, it got rolled out at Silverstone in 21, I think, in advance of the new rules. And then every team and every team's mother had a show car that would appear somewhere. Whereas the 26 car is still so novel. Actually seeing it in person, I think actually there are moments where you might have just briefly let yourself think that was an Audi F1 car. It wasn't. It wasn't even the full 2026 livery, but it's an interesting showcase. I know there's a lot of people who don't really care about aesthetics, and obviously they're not as important as what's under the bodywork or the actual bodywork of the real thing. But they can tell a story, and for Audi this was a unique way of doing it. Certainly divisive. I haven't dared to check all the possible forums online to see what people think of the livery, but it's basically a mashup. It's a mashup of, you know how much automotive manufacturers love concept cars. So it's a bit of that on the front half. That's the titanium sort of from the Concept C that got launched by Audi a few weeks earlier. And then the back half is more of that kind of what you would say conventional kind of F1 branding, but certainly a different kind of F1 branding. And I'm not going to go too much down the path of colorways and whatnot here, but the only thing I would say that stood out, pun not intended, what really stood out to me is I don't think I've seen a colour as bright on an F1 car as that red. So if that livery is anything close to what Audi will run next year, that car's genuine. It should really stand out on track.
Well, presumably they will change it a little bit because it's kind of a half and half livery, isn't it? I prefer to think of the front bit that's silver as more 1930s nod, even though I know it's something a little bit more modern.
No. It is the 1930s Auto Unions is part of the inspiration for the titanium that they're using on the Concept C, which is what this ties into. So it's very overt. Like that's not that's a neat coincidence or like it's something you only notice after the fact. And one of the just the coolest things about this event last night is that one of the Auto Union cars was there. The Type C, is it the 36 car or 37 car?
Yeah, Rosenmeyer won the 36 European Championship. He did run in 37 as well, not quite so successfully.
Yeah, and so that was there as part of a this sort of red carpet thing before the main launch itself. All we got told in advance was that it would be like an Audi Motorsport Legacy at the red carpet, and so I thought it would be like, we're invited to be there. We stand either side of a long red carpet and a bunch of mega Audi drivers and personnel from yesteryear sort of walk through. And that's 20% of what happened, because when I was hanging around, just this glorious noise appeared from one of the garages around the back of where we were waiting at the Audi Experience Centre. And then the Auto Union just came absolutely spearing out down towards the end of it's really hard to describe what that is. It's kind of like half runway, half car park as part of like the huge facility that Audi has. And then came through, and it did, I reckon, 4 or 5 basically like mini laps. And when they were using these classic cars, loads of brilliant Audi machinery there, Le Mans winners, touring cars, amazing rally cars as well. And they were using them to ferry the Audi legends from sort of the background to the red carpet. So the Auto Union was there, and there's some video that you can see if you're on the Race Members Club. Go on the Race Members Club on Patreon and have a little look, because I did try and get a bit up close to the Auto Union, and you can see that connection. So you're right. So there's there's an overt nod to that in the first half, in the front half of the livery, which I think is kind of their way of tying Audi's F1 team to the brand identity they want to create for the wider Audi brand identity, the modern iteration of models, whether that's concept cars or the real thing. But I think that colour will make it onto the real car. I think that might be the base colour. And then this new Audi red. So they've picked a new shade of red basically for Audi, but also specifically F1, and the four rings will be in that red as well. And then this sort of carbon as well on the back half of the car. I suspect that the design will be a bit more interwoven rather than this real harsh cut down the middle. If it is like that, and it's just got, Revolut and Adidas stickers and whatnot over the top, it's going to be interesting to look at and divisive. But yeah, just it was really well thought out. I thought, because I'm very wary of coming across like I've completely drunken the corporate Kool-Aid here. I was very hesitant coming into the event because I was a bit unsure what I'd see. I didn't really understand the point. And it's obviously still, in its most cynical way, a glorified corporate exercise. But all of the motorsport heritage stuff, all of the stuff that they've done to try and actually tie this in with the road car side, the motorsport history side, like, I cannot fault that at all. I was thinking about this really hard, like yesterday through the course of the event, and like it was completely sincere. It was a full buy-in. Like you were left in no doubt that this is going to be a full-on Audi attack on motorsport, but it's also very, very much part of Audi itself. And so I think for what they were trying to pull off, I don't see how they could have actually handled that better.
Right, so you've got a nice car, you've got some historic racing heritage stuff, all very nice. What about the tangibles? Obviously, this is actually the first time Audi have really gone to town with their F1 team, because it's all, ever since they started to buy into Sauber, and it was a gradual process, then they sold a bit to Qatar as well. But it's not really been Audi, has it? And this seems to be the first time they've really started to say, yeah, Audi's an F1 and really make proper noise about it. So it's kind of 2026 starts here. But what did you actually learn about the wider progress, the tangibles that will actually influence what's going on track?
Yeah, so it's obviously they've picked this moment because they're approaching the key milestones. So one thing that was mentioned throughout this event is that the engine fire-up is very close. That's going to be quite a big moment because that will be when Neuberg-built engine is married to Sauber-built chassis, and they actually run something in the car for the first time. So that felt really significant that I lost count, but I'm pretty sure every time someone spoke on stage or as part of the sort of peripheral media sessions, the fire-up got mentioned. They're really looking forward to that. So there are some short-term milestones that are being ticked off. I believe the very first engines that are going to run are now done. So they are now they're being constructed. There'll be some that will be freighted to Bahrain as early as December. So my guess would be, unless there's any kind of way that they would be able to fast track a solution, I suspect they'll do the fire up in early December, and then that will then basically give sign off for the Bahrain engines to be shipped, because you don't want to ship, I presume, your testing engines and then discover during fire up that you've got a chronic problem or something like that. So my guess is that's the way around it would be. But it was interesting because I asked Mattia Binotto, who's obviously the head of the Audi project overall and takes overall responsibility for the Sauber and Audi sides, and it's Binotto's job to make this not Audi side and Sauber side. It's just going to be Audi. But I asked him about the engines because obviously you've got this tricky thing to manage with the logistics, with the fact that it's the first engine, but you've also got to make it as good as possible. So you've got tests in late January, you've got an overseas tests in February, and then you've got the first race in Australia. So how do you blend those deadlines with that chase of the necessary performance? And I felt like this was the most tangible answer. This was the most useful bit of information from the entire event. It's very clear that what they have got now, this very first completed engine, is a conservative Audi engine that is focused on reliability. They want to be able to go to Barcelona, go to Bahrain, rack up miles. The race engine, which they're going to run, obviously, for the first time in Melbourne, Binotto said it's going to be quite distant from the engine that we see, or not see, but, that defines the performance of the car in Barcelona and in especially in Bahrain, which is the proper public test, not the behind-the-scenes collective one. And he even talked about how they're still trying to push around deadlines to just be able to make sure that final engine is as advanced as it can be performance-wise. I don't think anybody at Audi, Binotto's always been quite realistic about this project since he joined it. I don't think anybody at Audi is kidding themselves into thinking that they can come in and make the class-leading engine, but it's all about making sure that they're in a position to be respectable. Another thing that came out, and this links to this, when they were doing a big presentation before the reveal, Jonathan Wheatley, the team principal, sort of explained it's sort of being broken down into kind of a 3-phase thing. And I'm going to butcher it if I try and remember the exact names they gave to each of the different phases. But it's essentially they want to come in as a challenger initially, knowing that they're not an underdog. You can't be Audi and an underdog. They're not really synonymous. But realize and respect that you are in an F1 context the underdog. Like, you're on the back foot. You're trying to make a respectable go of it. Then the second phase is where you become more competitive. You become a legitimate competitor closer towards the front of the field. That's when you start fighting for podiums. Maybe that's when you start sort of sniffing around a race win. But then the final phase is win it. That's why we won't get into that too much here. But the reason I mention it is because what they're doing with the engine is obviously critical to that first phase. If it's unreliable and it breaks down all the time and they can't run and it's an embarrassment, it's a disaster of a first season. But if it's really reliable and massively underpowered and they're nowhere near, that's also kind of embarrassing because it means Audi's completely messed up the engine rules that were in large part done to get Audi through the door, and it's going to make the car uncompetitive, so they'll have rubbish results as well. So I was really interested to focus on that engine side yesterday evening, as much as I could anyway, because obviously they don't want to say too much.
Yeah, and it's logical for them to push the developments as much as they can because there's a sign-off date. Basically, it's homologated by March the 1st. So that's kind of when your development stops. So you want to push that as much as possible. But some of these components are long lead time. So the reason there can probably be potentially quite a big difference between the test engine and that final one is if you make sure you get everything made for the test engines, then you can push development, make what you need for the power units to actually run in the car, and actually you have to do a reference engine as well that the FIA will steal and stash as well, just in case that needs to be referred to an actual complete power unit that they've got, which I think is a month later by April. So there's all sorts of manufacturing timelines as well there. So yeah, it's a logical and interesting approach there. And yeah, like you say, we don't really have a feel for performance. But I must admit, the closer we've got to 26, the sort of less concern there is perhaps about Audi. That's the impression I've got in terms of the power unit. Doesn't mean they're going to be market leading, but it doesn't. There's not been anything I've really heard suggest they're in trouble. They seem to be hitting the targets quite satisfactorily, and as far as we can tell, which is based on very, very, very vague whispers and guesswork, is that they should be okay.
Yeah, I think they'll have. I think they'll have a respectable deficit. I think it's really hard to know, but they've obviously recruited different people from different areas. Binotto has a very good idea of the best case scenario you can kind of estimate your performance at. So, and obviously he will know from 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, he'll know what it feels like when you're lost and when you're probably nowhere near where you need to be, from when Ferrari got it so wrong at the start of the hybrid era. And then nobody's expecting anybody really to fall foul of things to quite that extent. But there is zero impression at all that it's, anything close to crisis mode or anything. In fact, the atmosphere yesterday evening, and I suspect some of the, I mentioned it before, but I suspect some of that kind of just inherently cool stuff that they were doing around the history played into this a lot. But it was very relaxed, very kind of not confident, but almost like cheerful. It felt like yesterday evening brought together a lot of different parts of everything, and it was just something for a lot of people to enjoy. And I think it's easy to do that when you have something that is so unforced, because the Audi stuff is so natural. The motorsport history, you don't have to pretend. Like, no one's hamming that up at all, because it's there, it's tangible, it's baked into its own DNA. But also motorsport, it's rewritten motorsport history and won so many different championships. So that's fine. But if things were in trouble, it would have shown through. There'd have been cracks in that nice shiny exterior. And I didn't get that impression at all. I asked Gernot Dollner, the boss of Audi, about the impact that Binotto's had and the kind of trajectory of the last 12 months. Because my personal opinion, I was actually speaking to Alan McNish about this just before this sort of official stuff kicked off. And I said to him, it feels like for the last sort of 12 months or so, actually, Audi has got itself to where it kind of needs to be in terms of structure, in terms of putting things in place, and ideally would have had that from the start. But sometimes, obviously, so this is the problem with a works program with a manufacturer as big as Audi. There's so many moving parts, and people that were there can suddenly not be there anymore. Sometimes, especially the new people, so Dollner coming in, then obviously Binotto being recruited, and so they can't control any of that. So it would be unfair to sort of confront them with this idea that they've just wasted 18 months when they're like, we weren't here, so we couldn't have done anything about that. I wonder if some of that pain of the first 18 months that put them behind, and I think it did put them behind, Dollner sort of claims that it didn't, but I think he kind of has to say that. I don't think they could have got to where they are now without going through that. I feel like Audi needed to be exposed to that from in a company way. Won't waste any more time too much on that side of things, but Dollner basically said that he's very happy with what he's seen over the last 12 months and the position that they've got to on both sides in terms of bringing it together. So if it's a total disaster, those words will carry a huge amount of weight, because it'll be like, well, why were you so happy with this when you were counting down to just over 100 days before your first race? You said everything was great. So I think we have to take that. At face value.
Yeah, and we're only a couple of months away from starting to find out how the performance really is on track, but some gentle confidence from Audi so far. Now, for those of you listening to the audio version of this podcast, we're going to hear Scott's report from on the ground. So if you're watching the video version, if you seek out the audio-only version, you'll be able to hear Scott's reporting. We didn't have any video from that, but you can find that and have a listen to what he had to say. As we continue to look ahead to 2026 and Formula One's sweeping rule changes, we've partnered with Shell to look at one of the most fascinating aspects of this, the switch to advanced sustainable race fuels. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Valeria Loretti, Shell's principal scientist for motorsports. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
It's great to have you. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Shell Innovation Partnership with Scuderia Ferrari HP. Goes back 75 years, an enormous amount of success. 1950 Monaco Grand Prix, the second World Championship race, that was the start of it. 12 Drivers' Championships, 10 Constructors' Championship, more than 190 victories. What is it about this Ferrari-Shell partnership that works so well?
Well, let me explain the innovation partnership first. So we have two major pillars that are behind the partnership. One is about innovation and working between the Shell experts and the Ferrari engineers in Maranello to understand how the power unit is designed, what is its appetite, and how to formulate and optimize the race fuel composition to generate maximum performance and maximum efficiency. Then obviously we don't only talk about race fuels, but we have also race lubricants. One of the major players is engine oil. And engine oil in Formula One is the hidden hero, is there not to provide a lot of performance, it is mainly there to deliver reliability. So to defend the engine, to protect it from friction, from wear, but also to cool it down and to keep it clean. So we have a full team of scientists who is looking after all these formulations, working hand in hand with the engineers in Maranello. We literally have this team having daily meetings with them, exchanging understanding, discussing the results, and taking joint decision on how to move forward through this big R&D project. The second element, the second pillar behind the partnership is the services that we provide on track. That is actually my team directly. And obviously, we are not only accountable for making sure that all the products arrive on time in the right space and are delivered to the teams at the right moment, but we're also there to provide them with technical support day in, day out through the whole week of the race. My team arrives on Tuesday night, a bit earlier if we are talking about overseas races. Then on Wednesday, they are there to build the trackside lab. Child Trackside Laboratory is a small container which is fully equipped like a chemistry lab and is fully functional. So we have machinery, we have consumables, we have reagents, we have computers, and we use this environment to provide the technical service and the support that the Scuderia Ferrari HP needs. So the trackside laboratory is really built inside the Scuderia Ferrari HP garage. We are normally located in the tire corridor, so the tire guys are our best friends. But this could vary depending on the setup of the paddock. And we always have at least 2 Shell scientists that are traveling with the team. On the Thursday, they start all the work about compliance. When the drums arrive, very likely they will be as they left Shell Technology Center in Hamburg. But there is always a small risk of contamination. An example could be if you are in a very humid environment like Singapore race, you may have condensed water turning liquid inside a drum. And if a drop of water goes into the fuel, that is something that it shouldn't be there. Therefore, we need to check the quality of the fuel which is in the drum before this is delivered to the car tank. So then the fuel is transported into the fuel dispenser and from the fuel dispenser into the car tank. And by every of these steps, we take a sample. Samples are taken in these aluminum containers and we check it for compliance. So there is no development, no changes to the fuel formulation happening on track, but the fuel analysis is very, very important to make sure that the fuel is exactly as it should be. The race fuel formulation is homologated with the FIA at the beginning of the season. And the FIA has the right to walk in the garage and take fuel samples if they want to. They can take samples from everywhere. So for us, it's really important to make sure that there is no contamination during the supply chain, because if they find some non-compliant fuel, the driver can be disqualified. Another very important analysis is the one that we do throughout the weekend and is on all the lubricants. We use for engine oil samples these plastic containers, and we take engine oil samples before and after every single session. And every time the engine is turned up for a fire up, for example, we take samples and we analyze it for key physical and chemical properties, but also for the amount of wear metals we can find inside. So by this comparison, we can immediately detect if there is some unexpected wear going on in the engine. So it's like doing a blood analysis. We can understand from how the pattern of the metals is in the oil if the engine is healthy or if there is something unexpected. So these data are being shared to the engineers on track, which are normally located just a few steps away. It's shared to them in form of a report, which goes out 15-20 minutes after the session is finished. So the engineers can understand if everything is as expected or have additional information if they have to take critical decisions. You know, by regulations, the teams have 4 power units throughout the whole season, which is 24 races. It's not a lot. So they need to have all the information they need to take the right decision. For example, to when to change it, when to substitute any part if they can, or really change their strategy. This is one part of the puzzle, one piece of information, but it's really important to them. So it is not only the data that we share, but it's also the understanding of this data. That is why having Shell personnel who are skilled chemists and technicians is really important, because they can help the engineers put in the data into context and understand the chemical implication, where the engineers obviously understand the engineering implications.
And that aspect of the collaboration is critical, isn't it, in terms of making sure there's not reliability problems, there's not failures. You're effectively looking into the future through this analysis, because you can see the problems as they're either manifesting themselves or they're starting to get a little bit closer, and you can monitor that over a period of time.
Absolutely. So we measure parts per million. So it's a tiny concentration of metals. And we have a huge database, because obviously the partnership is 75 years. Trackside Laboratory has been introduced around the 80s, 90s. It was at the beginning something very, very basic. So we had some used oil analysis machinery and some density measurement opportunities, so very, very basic equipment. And through the years, just like the fuels, also the support on track has developed. It is really critical to build the database to help the engineers understanding this. You measure 2 times the same thing, you will not get twice the same result. But to understand if this is an alarm bell, a red flag or not, that is where you need that chemical expertise.
When you're having to make a race fuel, say, for Ferrari, can you take me through that R&D process, the work that's required in order to go from, right, we're starting on this, to actually delivering a product that's going to win races in a car?
Well, that's the job of my colleagues in the product development team. And that is really down to understanding how different molecules bring in the mixture different properties, and how to optimize the ratio between these molecules to have a fuel or a lubricant which is compliant with regulations, but still has maximized its output. For fuels, we have developed over the years an algorithm to digitally simulate the properties of the fuel based on their composition. So we can create a cloud of data and pick just the best candidates that we then send to Maranello for the engineers to test it out. But based on that feedback, we can also keep optimizing our algorithm. So it is a constant loop of feedback. We try new ingredients, new ratios, new compositions. We tried to predict what will be the properties of these fuels and these oils, but then they will be tested. Only the best candidates, the most promising, will be tested in Maranello, and we get the feedback. Yes, this is great, keep on, go further that way. Or no, it doesn't work, so let's try to look into something different.
And the pressure of developing that fuel that's going to perform, the constant feedback, the back and forth with Ferrari, must be of immense value to Shell, and at the heart of the reason why there's this long-standing innovation partnership with the team.
Absolutely. So from this research and development program, we can take a lot of learnings, and the feedback is going very fast, but also the stake is really high. So Ferrari is like always hungry. They are always hungry for more. And if you do a great job and you deliver a great formulation with fantastic performance and efficiency, then the following day they will come back and say, okay, so what's next? We want more. So it is an environment which is, high pressure, but also high reward, because you keep pushing yourself, you keep trying to think out of the box and bring new elements. It's a very creative process. And then it is part of the teamwork. So the optimization of the fuel, the optimization of the oil will obviously be part of the very complex organism that will deliver the performance on the track.
And for you personally, this innovation partnership with Ferrari that's gone on for so long, what do you get out of it? What does Shell get out of it? Why do you think that these two companies, these massively successful companies, fit together so well?
Well, obviously, for Scuderia Ferrari HP, there is a lot of performance, efficiency, and opportunities to create a competitive advantage. For us, as an energy company, there is the opportunity to exploit an R&D project, which goes at very fast pace and has clear goals and boundaries and delivers us a lot of learnings and knowledge. The two companies have been working together for so long because they share the same values. We trust each other. We know that we leverage really the best expertise from each other's area, and we pursue the same goal. We want to be technology leader, we want to be innovators, and we want to win in Formula One. For me personally, it is an amazing feeling to be part of this organic team. I have the pleasure to be present at several races during the season and being working in the Scuderia Ferrari HP garage in our Shell Trackside laboratory together with my team. And we know that we are part of that success when Charles or Lewis are on the first step of the podium.
Well, as always, thank you very much, Valeria. Fascinating. We'll be back soon with an in-depth look at the 2026 fuel. So, Scott, you talked about the confidence, but what's Audi's messaging in terms of the timeline for success? Because it's fair to say since they first announced, I think it was in 2022, that they were coming into F1, didn't say what team with at that stage. Since then, kind of the timelines for success have shifted around a little bit. So what have they settled on?
They've settled on this narrative of fighting for championships in 2030. So they want to give themselves 5 seasons basically before they can. So and crucially, we know that manufacturers can't avoid a 3-year plan, 5-year plan, whatever. Going for that 5 years effectively to fight for championships, you're like, okay, you've probably within that kind of cliche, you've gone for the more sensible one. But I think actually the language around it is quite clever. Fighting for championships in 2030 is very different to saying we want to win the championship by 2030. They want to fight for championships in 2030. So a crucial difference, because I think it reflects some realism. And I think that realism's come from Binotto and Wheatley, who obviously know what it takes to put together an organisation that can win races, fight for titles, in Wheatley's case at Red Bull, win championships as well. Binotto knows all the mistakes that a works team can make and not actually get the job done. So, and that's not to say that he would have been, completely blameless in any of that. He'll have learned lessons. Too from his time at Ferrari. The messaging around that is effectively a bit more implicit, but I think there is a tacit admission that they could have got further along if they had everything in place a bit sooner. But I think it's very good that the target has shifted to basically reflect that. And 2, I like the fact that they're not kind of moping about it. They're not making excuses. Maybe that will change. Maybe if it's going really badly after a couple of years, you'll inevitably have people starting to point fingers at the fact that 18 months was wasted at the start of the project or whatever it ends up being. But they're certainly not doing that right now. I sort of hinted at it before, but Dellner said in one of the roundtables that I was in that because he was asked if they'd lost ground in that time and if they weren't basically fully on F1 before he came in, because when he came in, that coincided with a big review of everything, and that ultimately led to all the management changes that brought Binotto in, Andreas Seidel, and a couple of other people left. And he just doesn't. He won't subscribe to that view. So very much, we have been given the runway here to judge the Audi 2026 project as an uncompromised Audi entry into F1, which I think is maybe not a completely accurate reflection of what has happened since the summer of 2022. I think it could have been a better version of this. But the fact that they're presenting it this way, at least it means they're not hiding. So be very interested, obviously, not only to see where they start, but obviously this 2030 goal, which Binotto says is ambitious but realistic, like the progress they make towards that. Because if we know anything, Ed, and we know very little, progress in Formula One by big teams or ambitious teams is rarely linear. So are they going to have a good first season and then struggle? Are they going to have a year or two where they're actually treading water, but then they make a big step? I don't know. But I'm really fascinated to find out.
Yeah, it's impossible to forecast, really. Ultimately, I think if I was in their position, I would be looking for whenever the rule changes, which should be 2031 on the current schedule, shouldn't it? But obviously, I'm not bound by as you say, you always have to have a 5-year plan, don't you? Of which the first 3 years are kind of vaguely relevant. Well, first couple of years are relevant, the third year sort of relevant. 4 and 5 tend to be a little bit pie in the sky because you can revise them. And years 4 and 5, then you start adding what are now 6th and 7th years. So it's going to be really, really tough because for all the heritage, all the stuff about Audi succeeded in every form of motorsport it's done, etc., etc. Yes. But it's very, very easy to say X manufacturer comes in, it's got the heritage and the resources, it will succeed. And you can point to a number that have. But you can also point to a number that haven't. And there's no fundamental reason why Audi will definitely succeed, except if it does everything extremely well. Now, I would say that the course changes they've had and what we've seen this year on track in terms of execution, I was impressed with the turnaround they had on the car. It was quite an unstable car, tricky to drive. You could just about get a lap out of it in qualifying, but struggled on race pace. They made a series of changes. They were kind of a series of 3 upgrades that yielded good performance. Still a little bit tricky to drive in qualifying trim, which is why the qualifying results were a little bit up and down. But fundamentally, it's a good point-scoring race car at this stage as well. So lots of tangible progress this year that wasn't there last year. So there's lots of sort of gentle positives, but it's one thing to be a team that can climb to be in contention for 6 in the Constructors. They're in that P6, 3P9 battle. But it's another thing entirely to make that next breakthrough. So that's the big question. And there's still more work to be done with this team, isn't there? They've invested in Hinwil, they're improving it, but it's definitely not the finished article. Their facilities are not the equal of F1's leading teams yet.
No, and Wheatley talked about this quite a lot yesterday evening. There were 2 main things that I picked up on from him. One is that he talked about the number one thing that they need now at Hinwil is strength in depth in terms of the workforce. And his point was not that the people at Sauber aren't good enough. It was they need to have 2 of everybody good enough in every single position. So that if they need to rotate, if someone needs to move somewhere else, if someone leaves and they need a succession plan, they've got that strength across the board in the organisation. And this is where I think a lot of the final phase of recruitment and still increasing the headcount will come from. It's not necessarily going to be making new positions. It's not. I mean, if the right people come along, they will put people in the highest possible positions that they can, even if that means ousting someone that's already there. But it's more about reinforcing what they have right now. The other thing that Wheatley said, which it's fairly obvious on the surface, but I think the fact that he marked it out as something that Sauber really needed and has helped Audi as well, is he feels this season's given them momentum. This is a team that was just it was having gone through that slow death before when they were in financial crisis. They'd kind of then got themselves up to a nice phase of respectability again, peaking with the way that they started the current rules in 2022. But again, that just was followed by this gentle decline, wasn't it, into the point of 12 months ago where by this point 12 months ago, they still hadn't scored in 2024, had they? They had the late flourish, the upgrade at the end of the year that made everything a little bit more positive again. But this year's just given them, pretty much across the board, everything's better this year. So Wheatley was talking that it's a team that he's already noticing more of a cultural shift. And one of those things, it's an intangible, but it's something specific he has flagged, is he senses that there's a bit more belief within the organization now. We can do this. We can be a good race team. We can develop this car effectively. And it might sound really stupid because this is elite sport and this is F1. How could this team exist anyway and not believe that? But they went through the ringer. And, 24 was proving to be a really, really tough year. They were getting kicked by people like us, basically constantly, right? So to have come back from that shows resilience, but it does also show quality. And Wheatley's message was we have proven this year that other teams aren't automatically better than us. And that, I think, for the Sauber side is really important because it could be very easy with this relationship for Audi to come in as the works team, as the slightly detached side in Neuberg, and point fingers at Sauber, make it look like the Audi's all singing, all dancing, like that side of things fine, but it's plucky, Sauber's still got work to do, they're not good enough. I'm not saying that's what anyone at Audi did, but it would be very easy, especially if 26 came around, the Sauber side was low on confidence and then low on results. That would be when you start to see cracks emerge. I think, this isn't a guarantee by any means, I think Sauber's reinforced itself this year. I think it's given the organisation a bit more robustness and a much, much better foundation to be Audi's works team. And I think that's effectively what Audi was what Wheatley, was hinting at.
Yeah, that's what had to happen this year. If it was another year like last year, we'd be sat here looking at it thinking, what are Audi doing?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't overlook the fact they have still wasted some of that wonderful runway they had, because they didn't make the most of a big chunk of that, and they've got themselves to kind of an okay position in terms of the way Sauber's performing now. But we shouldn't, just because they were underachieving, consider what for at this stage is an okay level of achievement for that project. But when this was first announced, if we'd said, right, by the end of 2025, this is where they'd be, you'd be thinking, that's all right, that's fine, but not brilliant. So
you'd have hoped for a bit more, right?
You would, yeah.
The peaks, like they've obviously got the podium, which is great. And there was a point where, when Wheatley was talking yesterday evening, where they had like a few metrics up on the screen. So, like their average pit stop time, the number of points they've scored, the podium, something else, but I can't remember what it was. And it was part of his message about momentum. It was part of like there's been a step this year. This has become like a really credible racing team again. But yeah, if it's just it won't necessarily define the project and whether or not it's successful. But I still think you're right. It's legitimate to have a little bit of a what if, because I think they've rescued it. I think that's what's happened. I think they've stopped it being a massive underachiever, and they've got it to a level where it should be fine next year. It won't be. I'd be stunned if it's brilliant, and if there are any moments next year where I go, Audi's in F1, here we go. This is like I think they'll struggle to do that. They might, but I just think they'll struggle to do that. But there shouldn't be now any moment where you go, what are Audi doing? What have Audi got themselves in for here? They're so lost. And I sincerely believe 18 months ago, that was a realistic outcome. And that looked to be the trajectory that they could be on, because it looked like it could just fall to a bunch of infighting that meant the Audi side wasn't maximised, that the Sauber side went a bit unloved and uninvested in, and that it became so much weaker than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the risk. And obviously, where it is in the competitive order at the start of the season, it'll be very dependent on the power unit side. I think we can be reasonably confident that a decent car, a decent chassis will be turned out by Hinwil. So if both sides do their job decently, it should be a decent enough package. I'm using the word decent a lot there, but if Audi start next season or throughout next season, they're kind of mid-pack, that's an okay staging post. But then again, it's going to come down to where is mid-pack, how big are the gaps going to be? We have absolutely no idea. So yeah, it's a credible foundation. They've got a decent driver lineup as well. That's important. Gabriel Bortoletto's come on well this year. Nico Hülkenberg, he's getting on better with the car in qualifying now, because qualifying's actually been a bit of a struggle for him a lot of this year. But now I think he said he's got a better relationship with the car in qualifying, he described it as, in Brazil. But the thing I actually like about what they've been doing recently is it's less things like the third place at Silverstone was great. They had a big result in Spain as well. But I actually quite like races like Mexico, where Bortoletto, I think, went from 16th to 10th, just with a good, consistent, well-executed, dogged race drive. And Hülkenberg at Interlagos was able to kind of scrape through to the top 10 in qualifying in both the sessions. Then he had a good run, picked up a couple of points in the race. Those are always really hard-won points when you're kind of in a normal race. And it's the ability not just to pick up the odd big result, but kind of consistently be scoring that gives me a lot of encouragement about that team. That last year, on top of performance problems, there are lots of ways it found to shoot itself in the foot. The joke I always had was that it seemed to be no matter where they started, you'd see Joe and Bottas running 19th and 20th by about lap 15.
Yeah, it was the running joke last year was the inverted timesheets, wasn't it? That Audi were inverting the timesheets.
Yeah, the timing screens the wrong way around.
Yeah, so it was it was very much a race to the back. But they've fortunately moved past that. I think I used the word robustness earlier to describe sort of what Sauber's added for this year, and I think that's the case kind of across the board with it in terms of the tangibles as a racing team. So I think it is now a more robust option for Audi's works team, but everything else about it is more robust too, is kind of what I'm saying. I'm not going to use that. That's now my decent. I've used it too much in too quick a time frame. But it's clearly found something and become a more efficient, more effective design team, technical team. It's been able to. I think it's done a better job at producing that stuff over time as well. There have been too many times the last couple of years where it's just takes too long for them to actually get stuff to the track, get stuff figured out first, and then get stuff to the track. But then also, the race weekend execution, the decision making, the quality of the car, just a car that isn't like. I mean, sometimes it is still a lower midfield car, but a car like you say that is. It's not just on its great days it finishes 6th or 7th, gets a load of points, and then is then anonymous for 6 weeks. It's just become a perfectly legitimate midfield car. And again, if there's anything that has had like significant transformation or a massive upward trajectory, it's that, isn't it? Because 12 months ago, it still wasn't. It was only just beginning that journey.
It all adds up to just a good neutral starting point. It's why we're using words like decent and robust. It doesn't look like it's going to be a disaster. It doesn't look like it's going to be a sensational at the front triumph, which I know is a slightly difficult story to tell. But crucially, it's a very different one to the one that was around 12 months ago. So that's very, very encouraging from their perspective, that at least it's not going to fall apart almost before it's started. So, yeah, where they'll be, who knows, but just gently encouraging signs, and good to see Audi kind of creeping out of the woodwork, and the whole Audification, as I like to call it, of Sauber is now a little bit more out there in public. And I presume we're going to see more and more of that over the coming months.
Yes, I think this was a very good first proper entry into doing something as Audi, like this. It maybe doesn't come across quite that way, not being on site, because you can get caught up in the moment. And like I say, when things like the Auto Union blat out past you, it is hard not to get caught up a little bit in it and be like, oh God, this is so cool. But just the respect that they had for like the drivers of the past, like it wasn't a token gesture at all. They were really at the heart of it. Once you sort of moved past the corporate speak, of which there was obviously a lot, you got a glimpse of what Audi doing it properly can be. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be a successful F1 team, but you have to accept that it's a massive, massive corporate entity, and that's going to have its drawbacks, but it brings a lot of weight. It brings a lot of heft as well. So if you have something that can be anywhere near as successful as a lot of the things that we saw on display yesterday evening, then it's going to have a great time in Formula One. But that past is, you mentioned it earlier, that past is no guarantee of success in the future. I just like that we've seen a glimpse of Audi doing F1 its own way. This felt very Audi to do this. I've mentioned it in a couple of the dispatches that I've done across our channels. This felt like it had a bit of swagger. It had that sort of corporate sheen to a degree, but it also had a little bit of racing swagger about it. Like, look, we're here and we're not here to make up the numbers. We know it's going to be hard, but this is where we've been and we know where we want to go. And I have been to launches, I have been to team events where you end up feeling a little bit like, what's the message here? What's the point? Who are you doing this for? And I think last night was a good example of the fact that there are many strands to this. Corporate, motorsport history, F1, whatever. it can come together, and I think if it does, it can work very splendidly. It's just a massive if. But from what I've seen, it was nice. I think I would sum it up as it's nice to finally see what Audi in F1 could be. And that comes from different forms. That comes from what it's done itself, like with this kind of off-track event, with the brand stuff tying into that massive corporate side, but also everything we've talked about in terms of the Sauber progress, where they're at on the engine side, the sort of gentle confidence that they're going to be okay, that kind of stuff to start. I feel like it is a wholly different prospect to what it would have been 18 months ago. Is it still going to be at the level it needs to be as Audi's works team? No. It's going to take a few years to get to that point. Otherwise, they'd be saying we want to win championships in 2026. But as a starting point, I think they're finally on solid ground.
Well, if you want to take a bit of a look at what Scott saw, do take a look at the Race Members Club on Patreon. If you're not a member, you can click the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the race. Loads of extra content. We produce there, audio, visual, all sorts of things. Of the thriving community as well. And Scott's video is there as well if you would like to take a look. Right, well, we're going to turn our attention a little bit more back to this year because we've still got a fantastic championship battle to play out over the next 3 races. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.